Hi everyone, and welcome back to the F word, where the F stands for fertility. So on this channel, I talk all about fertility, reproductive health, women's health, our cycles, periods, etc., etc., etc. Today, what I want to talk about is this book. It is called Taking Charge of Your Fertility, The Definitive Guide to Natural Birth Control, Pregnancy Achievement, and Reproductive Health, and it's by Toni Weschler. I'm going to be going through the major things that I learned from this book, as well as some pros and cons about it. Overall, this is a recommendation. I really learned a lot from this book, and I really enjoyed reading it, even though it took me a long time. So the reason why I decided to read it is because I started getting kind of active in different Reddit groups about fertility and conception and women's health and stuff like that. And the number one thing that I saw recommended to understand how your cycles work and how you should be tracking it and all of that to know whether or not you're fertile is reading this book. This is the 20th anniversary edition. So one of the main things that I like about it is that it's been updated many times as new information has developed. The author, Toni Weschler, what it says about her says that she has a master's degree in public health and is a nationally respected women's health educator and speaker. She's also the author of Cycle Savvy, a book for teenage girls about their bodies, which I would really love to read and do a review on that book as well. So I'll make that a goal for the future. The first and foremost thing I want to talk about is how to track your cycles, which is what I learned from this book. But growing up, I heard a lot about how cycles are 30 days long, your period is the first 5 days. That's pretty much all I knew. I knew that you get PMS for a week or so before you get your period, and then you get your period, and then all of that goes away until the next month. Little did I know, there's way more to our cycles. So I'm going to start by telling you all an easy way to track your cycles. That's what this book is about. It's called the Fertility Awareness Method. A lot of people get it confused with natural family planning, and it's not exactly the same thing. Natural family planning is when you base whether or not you're having sex or whether or not you're using protection on a 28-day cycle, assuming that you ovulate on day 14. That's a much more simplified version that doesn't always work for people. I'm a great case in point. I don't know that I ovulate on day 14 because my cycles are definitely not 28 days and are different every single month. So the cool thing about the Fertility Awareness Method is that it teaches you how to read the signs of your own body in a variety of different ways to know exactly what day you're on in your cycle and what's going on with your hormones and whether or not you have ovulated or you are ovulating or you haven't yet ovulated and what phase of your cycle you're in. So I found that really cool. This book goes through how to use it as a birth control method as well as a pregnancy achievement method, and then also how to use it to start to not self-diagnose but recognize anything that might be unhealthy or irregular with your cycle and what that could mean for you. It also talks about menopause. It talks about sex in general and how it's affected by your cycles and your hormones. And I really liked this book because it had a very feminist overtone. First, I want to talk about just a basic rundown of how to track your cycles. So something I like about this book is that it has color inserts. There's one section of it that has like all these glossy colored pages. Obviously you can't see it in the camera, but I'll put a little thing up over here so that you can see what I'm saying. Using the Fertility Awareness Method, another thing that it's called is charting. So you might hear that when people are talking about trying to conceive or trying to track their cycles. So it's called charting because you do it with basically like a big paper chart, or you can record it digitally. I do it digitally just because it's more convenient, but a lot of people still really like using a paper chart because you can cross things out and whatever, it looks really official and you can keep it all in a journal and bring it with you places. So the three main things that you're tracking when you are charting using the Fertility Awareness Method are your cervical fluid, which is what comes out of your vagina when you sit down to go to the bathroom or you see it on your underwear. It's just like what the liquid that's coming out of you at most times. And it's super natural. A lot of people see like liquid or cervical mucus and they freak out and think that there's something wrong with them, but you're supposed to have it and it's supposed to change throughout your cycle. So the number one thing that changes is your cervical fluid, and that goes from, obviously you have a period, so it's blood, and then it goes dry for a while, and then it gets sticky and then creamy, and then right when you're ovulating it becomes this egg white cervical fluid, and it's called that because it looks just like egg whites. And this is the cervical fluid that's considered fertile because it's the cervical fluid that helps the sperm reach the egg or go through the cervix to reach the egg, and it only happens when you're ovulating. And then after you ovulate, sometimes some people get, and this is not the exact same for everyone, but this is a general pattern. After you ovulate, it can either go straight back to dry or it can go kind of creamy and then sticky and then back to dry. So that's the number one thing. The second one is called basal body temperature. Basal body temperature is a temperature that you take using a basal body thermometer. And you take it as soon as you wake up in the morning. So it's your body's lowest temperature because you haven't done any physical activity yet. And your body's just been resting all night. And then you take your temperature as soon as you wake up. Your basal body temperature is arguably the most important factor in knowing where you are in your cycle. If this method works for you, and I'll go back to that because tracking my basal body temperature did not work for me and I don't do it anymore. But some people have a lot of success with this. There's a saying called see the forest through the trees. So it's kind of like talking about zooming out on your chart. When you zoom out on your chart, you should see a pattern that kind of goes low, 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 maybe some variance up and down. But then once you ovulate, your temperature spikes, and then there's a little bit of variance, but it stays high for the rest of your cycle. Then when your period starts, it goes low again. The number one sign that you've ovulated is that your temperature spikes. So when people are trying to get pregnant, they see the temperature spike, they know that it's time to try to conceive. And that paired with egg white cervical fluid means your body is ready to go, you are ovulating or you just ovulated, you want to try to make that baby right now. If you're trying to get pregnant, if you're trying to avoid pregnancy, that's the time that you do not want to have sex or you want to use another method, birth control method in conjunction, like condoms or whatever. So those are the first two, basal body temperature and your cervical fluid. Your third one is the feeling and the position of your cervix. For some people, this is much easier to feel and track than for other people. It's kind of hard for me. I don't really track it, but some people have a lot of success. So the idea behind this one is when you are more fertile, when you're about to ovulate, your cervix physically moves lower in your body and it also opens up and gets really soft. That makes sense because it's biologically preparing to let sperm through to meet an egg, which you don't always want to happen, but that's what your body is naturally doing. So some people will insert fingers and feel their cervix every single day and track that. So those are the main three things that you're tracking every day, and you lay them all out in this nice chart. If it's on paper, you circle your temperature, and then you, there's like different shading things or different letters you can use to track your cervical fluid and your cervical position. And then some other things that people put on their chart are any medications that you took that day, any ovulation or pregnancy symptoms, depending on why you're charting. So there's a spot for ovulation cramps, or nausea, sore breasts, other things like that, and you can check them off or circle them. And then there's also spots to mark for when you're having sex. And I like this chart because you will use it however you want to use it. So if you're not interested in having children right now, you're trying to avoid pregnancy, you can mark out your perfect fertile window and know that you have to use another form of protection or not have sex during that window. And you don't even have to fill in any of those other symptoms if you don't want to, or medications or supplements. You can just skip them. If you're trying to get pregnant, then you know exactly when your fertile window is and you can have sex during that fertile window, and you can keep track of when you had sex to see if you should take a pregnancy test, if you're also checking off some of those things like nausea, frequent urination, etc. So I think it's a really versatile chart. That was a super fast rundown of how you do it. And now I'm going to go through some pros of the book, and then I'll talk about some cons. So the number one pro is that it teaches you about your cycle in detail. I just give a super fast rundown, but the book talks about all your different hormones that are surging or regressing during your cycle, what they do, what they mean, what they are in charge of in your body, other things that they can affect in your body. So it's super, super, super informative and super, super, super detailed. It took me a whole year to read this book, and I wasn't reading it every day. And there were whole couple of month periods where I wouldn't read it at all. But it is hefty. So I love the amount of detail that was in this book and how much I learned from it. It doesn't feel fluffy at all. It's very scientific. It's very down to business. But then the other pro about it is that I really like the accessible language. I felt like I was learning a lot, but that I wasn't learning from a textbook or from a cold, impersonal, scientific view. The language is pretty lighthearted. There's a lot of anecdotes in it, which I really like. The author is very personable and connects with the reader on a personal level and tells anecdotes and jokes. And there's hundreds and hundreds of stories of people who have used the fertility awareness method. I really liked all those really personal touches and hearing all these different stories that either the author recalled or that actual people wrote about the fertility awareness method and how people either used it to avoid pregnancy or achieve pregnancy or help to diagnose themselves with different imbalances or conditions or whatever. I also liked that it covered more than just pregnancy achievement and pregnancy avoidance. It covered menopause, it covered sex and sexual pleasure, it covered different diseases and how tracking your cycle can help you realize when there are things going on, and that it was just also basic information about our bodies that I did not know until I read this book. And reading this book made me really realize that we do not teach kids enough about their bodies. This level of detail I don't think is necessary for kids, but I should have known more. I remember when there were times where I was in between birth control and I was just using condoms to avoid pregnancy, and I didn't know when someone was supposed to ovulate in their cycle until I read this book. I thought that you're supposed to ovulate right before your period or right after your period, and I had no idea that it was generally in the middle of your cycle. So I was timing or deciding whether or not I should be worried about possible pregnancy based on completely false information. This book, I love the level of detail in this, and it made me realize that teenagers and kids should be learning more about their bodies. I already talked about the color inserts. I really like these. There's all kinds of things in here. So this is kind of graphic, but there's all different examples of charts, how to check your cervical fluid, how to take your temperature, all kinds of things. So it was just the color inserts were really nice examples and just kind of a fun thing to flip to while you're reading if you get bored of just looking at text over and over again. Some cons about this book for me. The number one was definitely that it was pretty heteronormative. It's definitely focuses on straight couples and it's a male and a female and they're in a heterosexual relationship. It's definitely not disrespectful of any other types of people, but it is dismissive. It's kind of well, this is what we're focusing on. And I recognize that you can't write a book that covers everything because it would be 5,000 pages. But it would have been nice if there was just more mention of couples or people that weren't in these heteronormative relationships or just cishet people. If I'm reading something that's scientific, that's by a doctor, I would like to know that doctor respects and recognizes those individuals and relationships, even if it's not about what my book is about or about me. Another con is that while reading it, you're definitely aware that you're being sold something, and not in a way that you have to buy something. The only thing I had to buy to start charting was a BASAL body thermometer, and that was you can get them for $12. So it's not I felt like I was being robbed, but you're definitely aware that the author is selling you this method, which I don't think is the worst con, because I didn't feel like I was being sold a product or anything like that. That would have been way more annoying. But this just was less general information and more really specific information about how to use this method, and here's all the reasons why you should use this method. But it did do a nice job of saying that this method isn't for everyone and it's not going to work for everyone. And that was my other con, which isn't even really like a con of the book or the writing, but a major con for me, even though I'm super happy that I read this book and that I learned everything that I did learn from this book, is that the method doesn't work the best for me. And that's for a number of reasons. One that I've already talked about is that taking my basal body temperature is really, really hard for me. It's hard for me to remember to do it. It's hard because of my insomnia. And I think that this would apply to a lot of people. Unless you're getting like 3 to 5 consecutive hours of sleep, your basal body temperature is not going to be accurate. That could be really challenging for anyone who works like less typical work shifts, for people who have babies and toddlers that they're taking care of, for tons of different reasons, people who have insomnia like me. So if you're waking up a lot during the night or just have an irregular schedule, then you can't really rely on your temperature to be very accurate. And then the other thing that makes it hard for me is that I always have to wake up having to pee really bad. Having to like hold my pee in always makes me really hot and like sweaty. So I wake up and then I'm anxious about taking my temperature, but I have to pee really bad. So I'm like hot because I'm anxious and I'm hot because I'm holding my pee in. So I just think that my temperature is often not accurate. Also, a lot of different factors can affect your basal body temperature. So for example, if you're sick, if you're traveling, if you're under an abnormal amount of stress, if you drank the night before, drank alcohol. The other major one is that you're supposed to take your temperature at roughly the same time every morning. So in my opinion, unless you are someone who has a fairly stable routine where they're going to bed kind of around the same time and waking up kind of around the same time and not drinking at all and aren't traveling and aren't under abnormal stress and aren't waking up throughout the night, it's really hard to trust my temperatures. So I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm younger and some people who are using this for pregnancy achievement or avoidance are older than me, but I feel like I don't have a super stable routine where I'm going to bed at the same time every night and waking up at the same time, especially because of my insomnia. So yeah, and if I'm like hanging out with friends on the weekend, then I'm gonna stay up really late. Obviously not right now because it's quarantine, but you know. My charts, my temperature, I cannot find the forest among the trees. My temperature to me looks like this. It's like, I've tried really hard, and then my OBGYN was like telling me that it seems like I was stressing and that right now taking my temperature doesn't seem to be helping anything, and it's definitely not helping me find out when I'm ovulating or if I'm ovulating, so I continue to take it. So I've gone back and forth. I think in general, it is a good idea to try, but it's also causing me stress. So right now I'm not tracking my temperature, but I am tracking my cervical fluid and a couple other things on the chart. So that was my other con, was that the method doesn't work for everyone. And then of course, also it shouldn't be a method that's used if the people practicing it aren't STI free and aren't getting tested and all of that. There's lots of reasons why individuals or couples should use physical barriers or other birth control methods besides this one. This is just the one that I found worked the best for me right now. My last con is very petty, but some of her jokes, the author's jokes, are just like really cringy, and that was hard for me. I think that she could do more to identify with younger people. I'll put it that way. The book focuses, I feel like it's geared towards like 30 to 50-year-olds, and the information is still the same regardless, and I'm really glad that I learned it and I liked the writing a lot, but I feel like the author could have done a little bit more to connect with younger readers, and that's why I'm really interested to read her book for teenagers that she wrote. Yeah, I felt as like a mid-20s woman, the author could have done a little bit more to connect with things that I might be doing and people my age are doing in our lifestyles and what we might be using this method for. All in all, like I said before, I'm so glad I read this book. I recommended it to so many people. I recommend it to you if you're watching this. If anything, just to learn about your own body. even if you read the whole thing and you decide that this birth control method is useless to you, birth control or whatever, pregnancy achievement method, whatever you want to call it, is useful to you or not useful to you, or like you already have a different birth control method, whatever, I still highly recommend this. It also went in depth about a number of different like disorders and diseases that people can have, such as PCOS, endometriosis, all of those. And that was super helpful to read about through this lens of like your hormonal cycles and what's going on in your body at different points in your cycle and how to recognize those trends. So if anything, I would still recommend trying to chart because it gives you a lot of power of knowledge. And then when you go to your doctor or your endocrinologist, your OBGYN, or like your whoever, then you're armed with knowledge of what's going on with your body in the last however many days you've been tracking. So you're able to say, hey, I think I'm feeling this way because of this that I see reflected in my chart, because I think that I didn't ovulate, or I think that I ovulated really late, or I think that my PMS is going on for too long, or I think that my period is getting really irregular, and could this be connected to why I'm feeling this way or why this other health issue is going on. It helps you learn about whether or not you might have an infection or more serious things. All that knowledge, I think, is really powerful, and I wish that I had learned it earlier, and I hope that I can inspire a lot of other people to, whether it's through this book or not, to learn about your bodies. I liked reading this book. I like reading. I like learning through reading, but I know that that's not everyone's cup of tea. I like it because I can highlight things and I can underline them and write things in the notes, and it's really easy for me to go back and refer to it, to just flip through and find the page I wanted to. I like dog-eared a bunch of the pages and wrote all over it. I liked this method, but regardless of whether or not you're gonna buy or borrow this book and read it, that knowledge made me feel really inspired. It made me feel really powerful. It made me feel more in control of my fertility and of my health and all of that. So I hope one way or another you're inspired to learn more about your body. And I'll try to teach people more about their bodies too through this channel, even though I'm not a doctor or a master of public health or anything like that. I'll just share with you what I learned from my own experiences and my own research. If you are interested in this book, and this is in no way like affiliated or an ad or anything. This author does not know that I exist, but I got it on Amazon. It came super fast. If you've already read it or you do read it, let me know what you thought of it. If you had different ideas or different takeaways than me. If you have other informational texts that are geared at like the general public and women in particular, I would love for you to let me know what those are, or maybe it's another person's YouTube series or a movie or a documentary or whatever. I'm all about gaining more and more knowledge about this stuff, so I'd love to make this kind of a sharing opportunity where we share with each other and you tell me where you learned about your body, and I would love to check that out. Maybe I'll make reviews about that also. Sometime in the future, I'll make a review. I'll read that book, Cycle Savvy, and make a review about that. And I'm hoping to come back with some more videos about some different menstrual products. And I'm planning on having a few guests on this channel to talk about their experiences with their cycles and with birth control. I'm really excited for all of that. Thanks for watching The F Word, and I'll see you again next time.